My son-in-law walked into the living room, grabbed the remote from my hands, turned off my TV, and told me to get out of his house. My daughter stood there holding grocery bags, watching me being humiliated without saying a word. I left quietly. No screaming. No tears. That was the part they misunderstood. Because hidden inside an old leather folder at my hotel was one document with only one name on it. Mine. The house had never belonged to them. And what happened next, no one saw coming. The evening news played softly through the living room while Diane sat in her usual chair beside the window, one hand resting on the worn armrest her late husband used to tease her about. Outside, the California sky faded into deep orange. Inside the house, everything felt carefully quiet. Too quiet. She lifted her tea slowly, eyes still on the television. Then footsteps crossed the hallway. Heavy. Fast. Ryan walked in without looking at her. His jaw was tight, phone glowing in his hand. He stopped directly in front of the TV. Diane frowned slightly. "Ryan, I'm watching that." He didn't answer. Instead, his fingers closed around the remote beside her chair. Click. The screen went black instantly. The room changed with it. No music. No voices. Just the low hum of the refrigerator somewhere in the kitchen. Diane stared at the dark reflection in the TV screen and saw Ryan standing behind her shoulder like he already owned the room. Ryan let the remote hang loosely in his hand for a second, almost enjoying the silence he had created. The blue light from his phone cut across his face while Diane remained seated, still trying to understand why the room suddenly felt unfamiliar. Then he finally looked at her. Cold. Impatient. "You heard me, right?" he said. Diane blinked slowly. "Excuse me." Ryan stepped closer to the couch and pointed toward the hallway. "Go to your room. This living room is mine now." The words landed hard. Not because he shouted them, because he didn't need to. Diane's fingers tightened around her teacup. Across the room, she caught movement near the kitchen entrance. Emily, standing frozen beside two grocery bags. Her eyes darted between her husband and her mother while Ryan dropped onto the sofa like a man claiming territory. Diane waited. One sentence. Just one. But Emily never opened her mouth. The plastic grocery bags trembled softly in Emily's hands. Diane noticed the thin red marks forming around her daughter's fingers where the handles dug into her skin, tight enough to hurt. Emily looked terrified, but not surprised. That hurt even more. "Emily," Diane said quietly, her voice almost careful, "did you hear what he just said to me?" Emily swallowed hard. Her lips parted for a moment, then closed again. Ryan leaned back against the couch with a smug little smile. "Don't start making this dramatic," he muttered. Diane kept staring at her daughter, waiting for instinct to win over fear. It never did. Emily lowered her eyes to the floor, and in that instant the silence stopped feeling accidental. It became a choice. Something inside Diane went completely still after that. Not shattered. Not defeated. Clear. Ryan picked up his phone again, already dismissing her existence like the conversation was over. "Good," he said casually. "Now I can finally relax in peace." Diane rose from her chair without another word. Her knees ached as she crossed the room, but her hands stayed steady. She reached the small wooden bowl beside the front door and picked up her keys. Emily took one nervous step forward. "Mom." But Diane didn't stop. No yelling. No tears. No scene. She opened the door quietly and walked out into the cooling California evening. Behind her, Ryan laughed. What neither of them understood yet was simple. The woman leaving the house was the only person who actually owned it. The worst part was not the shouting. Ryan did not scream every day. He didn't have to. Over time, the house adjusted itself around his moods the way people move around broken glass. And slowly Diane adjusted too. She stopped eating dinner in the dining room after Ryan complained about the sound of her silverware against the plate. After that, she carried her meals down the hallway to the small guest room she had quietly turned into her space. A tray on her lap. Door half closed. Television volume barely above a whisper. Some nights, she muted the TV completely whenever she heard Ryan's footsteps crossing the living room. Heavy steps meant irritation. Fast steps meant anger. If cabinets slammed in the kitchen, Diane waited before coming out. Emily noticed all of it. Diane knew she did. But every conversation ended the same way. "He's under pressure right now, Mom." So Diane learned to make herself smaller. Smaller voice. Smaller presence. Until the woman who owned the house started living inside it like she needed permission to breathe. Little by little, Ryan stopped acting like a guest and started behaving like the center of the house. The living room became his territory first. He stretched across the couch every night, shoes on the table, television blasting until past midnight while financial podcasts and loud videos echoed through the walls. If Diane lowered the volume in her room, Ryan raised his louder. If she closed her door gently, he slammed cabinets hard enough to shake the frames on the hallway wall. "Can you keep it down a little?" Diane asked once from the kitchen, barely above a polite tone. Ryan smirked without looking away from his phone. "It's my house too, isn't it?" Emily froze at the sink but said nothing. That was how he controlled everything. Not with fists. With atmosphere. Noise when he wanted attention. Silence when he wanted tension. And somehow, everyone around him kept rearranging their lives to protect the comfort of a man who contributed nothing while acting like a king inside someone else's home. Emily always arrived after the damage was done. Never during. She moved through the house like someone permanently cleaning up after a storm she refused to name. One evening, Diane found her quietly folding laundry in the hallway, while Ryan shouted into his gaming headset downstairs. "He didn't mean it earlier," Emily said quickly, avoiding eye contact. "He's just stressed right now." Diane leaned against the wall, exhausted. "Emily, he talks to me like I'm a burden in my own home." Her daughter's hand slowed for a second. Then came the same answer again. "Things will get better. We just need a little more time." Time. That word had become Emily's shelter. A soft excuse stretched over 4 long years. Diane studied her daughter carefully that night and felt a thought she hated begin to form. Was Emily truly blind to what Ryan was doing? Or had comfort made her willing to look away? Later that night, after the house finally grew quiet, Diane sat alone in the small guest room with only a lamp glowing beside the bed. On the dresser stood an old framed photograph of her and her late husband standing in front of the house the year they bought it. Back then she laughed loudly. Back then she filled rooms instead of avoiding them. Diane picked up the frame gently and traced the edge with her thumb. Her husband had worked double shifts for years to help pay for that house. She remembered choosing the curtains together, planting flowers by the gate, painting the living room on a summer weekend while music played through open windows. Now she barely crossed that same room without tension tightening in her chest. Somewhere along the way, she had started shrinking herself to make other people comfortable. Smaller needs. Smaller voice. Smaller life. And Ryan mistook that sacrifice for weakness. But what he did not know that night was simple. Diane had never transferred ownership of the house. Not to Emily. Not to him. Not to anyone. The hotel room smelled faintly of old carpet and strong coffee, but for the first time in years, Diane could hear herself think. She locked the door behind her, leaned against it for a moment, and finally let her hands shake. Not from fear. From release. Her fingers trembled as she placed the worn leather folder on the small desk near the window. Outside, downtown Los Angeles glowed beneath the night sky, headlights sliding through the streets like rivers of light. The reflection of the city shimmered across the faded documents inside the folder. Diane sat down slowly, and something unexpected happened. The fog inside her mind began to clear. No Ryan stomping through hallways. No television blasting from the living room. No careful listening for someone else's temper. Just silence that belonged to her. She opened the folder carefully, page by page, her breathing steadying with each document she touched. Old habits returned almost instantly. Dates, signatures, ownership lines. The woman Ryan thought he had humiliated was quietly becoming dangerous again. As Diane sorted through the paperwork, old instincts began waking up inside her one by one. She no longer looked like the frightened woman who had quietly left the house an hour earlier. Her eyes sharpened. Her posture changed. Because long before she became Mom or Grandma Diane, she had spent 32 years inside the Los Angeles County Land Records office. 32 years reading deeds, correcting ownership errors, catching fraudulent transfers people thought nobody would notice. She had watched brothers sue brothers over property lines, children fight their parents over inheritance, married couples turn vicious the second money and ownership entered the room. And through all of it, Diane learned one thing. Emotion lies. Paper doesn't. Ryan never bothered asking what she used to do before retirement. To him, she was just an aging woman who cooked quietly and stayed out of the way. What he never understood was almost laughable. The woman he dismissed as weak had spent decades handling thousands of property disputes exactly like the one he was about to lose. Diane leaned back in her chair slowly, one hand resting on the deed. Then she smiled for the first time that night. A few more documents slid across the desk before Diane finally found the one she had been looking for. The original property deed. She unfolded it carefully. The paper had yellowed with age, but the words remained clean and undeniable. Owner, Diane Parker. Only Diane Parker. No secondary name. No transfer record. No co-owner listed anywhere. Her eyes moved lower across the page, steady and precise now. There was no lease agreement filed for Ryan or Emily either. No legal tenancy. No contractual protection. Just temporary permission given through trust and family. And trust could be withdrawn. Diane let out a slow breath she did not realize she had been holding. For 4 years, Ryan had spoken like a man in control. He filled rooms with noise, confidence, and entitlement until everyone around him adjusted to his version of reality. But paper was different. Paper reduced people to facts. And the facts were brutal. Ryan was not the owner. He was barely more than a guest standing on borrowed ground. Diane stared at the deed for another long moment before reaching for her phone. There was only one person she trusted to handle this properly. Thomas Reed. The line rang twice before his calm voice answered. Diane? It's late. Is everything all right? She looked down at the paperwork spread across the desk. Not yet, she said quietly. But I think it's about to be. For the next several minutes she told him everything. Ryan's behavior. The humiliation. The years inside that house feeling smaller and smaller. Thomas listened without interrupting. Then came the question that mattered. The property is still fully in your name? Yes. A brief silence followed. When Thomas spoke again, his tone had changed. Sharper now. Professional. Then listen carefully, Diane. You are not asking anyone for permission. You are exercising your legal rights. Something inside her settled instantly. What happens next? She asked. Thomas closed a folder on his end of the call. Tomorrow morning, he said calmly. Ryan is going to receive the first thing he can't shout his way out of. The next morning arrived too quietly. Diane had just wrapped both hands around a cup of hotel coffee when her phone suddenly vibrated across the table. Emily. Diane answered immediately. Mom. Emily's voice came fast and uneven. There's a man at the front door asking for you. In the background, Diane could hear movement. Cabinet doors. Footsteps. Ryan complaining from somewhere deeper inside the house. Who is it? Diane asked calmly, though she already knew. I don't know. He's wearing a suit. He said it's official business. Before Diane could respond, Ryan's voice crashed through the phone. Who the hell shows up this early? He snapped. It's probably the damn internet company again. Diane closed her eyes briefly. Of course that was his first thought. Bills. Not consequences. Then came the sound that changed everything. Paper unfolding. Slowly. Shaking hands against thick legal pages. Emily stopped breathing for a second. Ryan, she whispered. What now? He barked. Another silence. This one different. Heavy. Terrified. Then Emily spoke again, her voice suddenly small. Ryan. This says notice of termination of occupancy. Emily's breathing turned uneven as her eyes moved down the page. Diane could almost picture her standing there in the entryway, one hand gripping the paper while Ryan paced beside her like a cornered animal. It says, Emily swallowed hard. We have 30 days to vacate the property. Ryan ripped the document from her hands. What the hell is this? He shouted. His voice exploded so loudly Diane had to pull the phone slightly away from her ear. This is insane. She can't do this. We live here. The man at the door remained calm. Professional. Sir, you've been formally notified. Please read the full document carefully. Ryan laughed sharply. No, this is intimidation. This is harassment. Paper crumpled violently in his fist. Then came the sound of more pages sliding free as he realized there were legal stamps attached. Official signatures. Filing numbers. Not a threat. Not a bluff. Real. Call your mother back, Ryan snapped at Emily. Right now. I'm already on the phone, Diane said quietly. The silence on the other end lasted half a second before Ryan erupted again. You're seriously trying to throw us out over one argument? One argument? Diane repeated. For the first time in years, her voice did not shake. No, Ryan. I'm ending 4 years of disrespect. And somewhere beneath his yelling, beneath the rage and insults, something new finally entered his voice. Fear. Ryan kept shouting, but Diane noticed something important now. His anger no longer sounded powerful. It sounded unstable, like someone trying to hold a collapsing wall together with noise alone. Emily's voice broke softly through the chaos. Mom, please. Can't we just talk about this? Diane looked out the hotel window at the city below before answering. We are talking about it. No, I mean... Emily stopped herself, struggling to breathe evenly. Why are you doing this to us? Diane closed the folder beside her. I'm not doing anything to you, Emily. The law is not attacking you. Her tone remained calm, steady. It's clarifying the truth. On the other end, Ryan cursed loudly enough for the words to blur together. But Diane no longer flinched. For years, his temper had controlled the emotional temperature of that house. Everyone adjusted themselves around it, softened conversations, avoided conflict, delayed reality. Now the balance was shifting. And for the first time, Diane found herself wondering something she had never allowed before. What would Ryan become once fear stopped working on other people? The call ended badly after that. Not with resolution. With noise. Diane heard something crash hard against the kitchen wall before Emily gasped in the background. "Ryan, stop." Another bang followed. Cabinet doors. A chair scraping violently across the floor. "This is insane," Ryan shouted. "She's trying to ruin us." But beneath the rage, panic had started leaking through the cracks. Diane could hear it clearly now. His breathing was uneven. His words stumbled over each other. The confidence that once filled every room in that house was beginning to collapse under pressure. "Say something," he barked at Emily. "Tell her she can't do this." Emily sounded close to tears. "Ryan, please calm down." "No. She thinks she can scare me with paperwork?" Diane remained silent for a moment, listening carefully while objects continued slamming somewhere behind the phone. For years, Ryan had controlled people by making them emotionally exhausted first. Now exhaustion was finding him instead. Then suddenly the line went quiet. Too quiet. Diane slowly lowered the phone from her ear. Because deep down, she already understood something Ryan still didn't. The eviction notice was only the beginning. And the next blow waiting for him would hurt far worse than losing a house. The next crack appeared 2 days later under the cold fluorescent lights of a grocery store checkout line. Emily stood beside the cart while the cashier scanned milk, bread, frozen dinners, and bottled juice one item at a time. Ryan stayed behind her, distracted by his phone, barely paying attention. "Total is $87.42, the cashier said politely. Emily slid the card into the machine automatically. For 1 second, everything looked normal. Then the screen flashed bright red. "Declined." Emily frowned immediately. "That's strange." She tried again. "Declined." The second beep sounded louder somehow. Sharper. People in line began shifting impatiently behind them. A woman with a stroller looked over. An older man near the candy rack stared openly now. Ryan finally looked up. "What's taking so long?" Emily's face drained of color. "The card isn't working." Ryan snatched it from her hand and shoved it into the machine himself. "Declined." Again. His jaw tightened instantly. "That's impossible." The cashier forced an uncomfortable smile. "Do you have another form of payment, sir?" Ryan looked around too quickly after that. Defensive. Cornered. Emily lowered her eyes in humiliation while whispers started moving quietly through the line behind them. Then her phone vibrated. One message from Diane. "The card was not broken, Emily. I closed it." Ryan called Diane before they even made it to the parking lot. The second she answered, his voice exploded through the speaker loud enough to make Emily flinch beside him. "What the hell did you do?" he shouted. Diane held the phone away from her ear slightly and continued stirring cream into her coffee. "The card was under my account," she replied calmly. "I closed access." "You can't do that to us." "To you," Diane corrected softly. "I did it to you." Ryan let out a bitter laugh that sounded close to panic. "This is abuse. You're trying to control us with money now?" Diane's expression never changed. "For 4 years I paid the mortgage, utilities, groceries, insurance, internet, and half your debts without complaint. You called that support." Ryan cut her off immediately. "Because family helps family." "Family also says thank you," Diane answered. "Family doesn't throw the owner of the house out of her own living room." Silence hit for half a second before Ryan snapped again, louder this time. "You're ruining Emily's life." Diane finally stopped stirring her coffee. "No, Ryan," she said quietly. "I stopped financing yours." Across the parking lot, Emily slowly closed her eyes. Because deep down she knew something terrifying. Her husband wasn't angry about respect. He was terrified about survival. Ryan kept talking over her after that. Excuses. Anger. Accusations thrown so fast they crashed into each other. You're punishing us because you're emotional. No, Diane replied evenly. I'm correcting something I allowed for too long. He scoffed loudly. You think cutting money fixes anything? Diane stood and walked slowly toward the hotel window, watching traffic move beneath the afternoon sun. For years I convinced myself I was helping family, she said. But help has an endpoint, Ryan. Dependency doesn't. You owe Emily support. Diane's voice hardened for the first time. I raised Emily. I did not agree to financially carry a grown man who insults me inside my own home. Ryan went quiet for a second. Only a second. Then came the bitterness. So what? You're just abandoning us now? Diane looked at her reflection in the glass. No. I stopped confusing kindness with obligation. The words landed harder than shouting ever could, because they were true. Ryan had spent years treating Diane's patience like a permanent resource, a safety net that would stretch forever no matter how badly he behaved. Now the net was gone, and suddenly he had to face gravity alone. Behind him, Emily sat silently in the passenger seat with tears slipping down her face, finally understanding the difference between being supported and being rescued forever. After the call should have ended, Ryan kept talking anyway. Faster now. His words rushed out in tangled bursts, jumping from anger to excuses so quickly even Emily struggled to follow him. You don't understand how hard things are right now, he snapped. The market shifted. Payments got delayed. I had investments tied up. This was temporary. Diane listened quietly. Then she asked the one question he clearly did not want to hear. Where is the money, Ryan? A pause hit the line immediately. Not silence. Calculation. Ryan cleared his throat. That's not the point. It is exactly the point. Emily slowly turned toward him inside the car. Diane could hear the movement through the phone. You told me we were saving, Emily said carefully. You said the accounts were growing. Ryan answered too quickly. They were. I just needed more time. How much time? Diane asked. Ryan's breathing sharpened. You're twisting things around. No, Diane replied calmly. I'm asking direct questions for the first time. That was when Emily finally noticed it too. Every answer Ryan gave sounded vague once someone pushed past his confidence. No numbers. No details. No proof. Only pressure. Deflection. Noise. Ryan suddenly exploded again, louder than before. I can fix this if everyone would stop attacking me. But the performance was slipping now. And sitting beside him in that parked car, Emily felt something cold begin to spread through her chest. For the first time in years, she started wondering if the man she married had been lying much longer than anyone realized. The legal meeting took place 3 days later inside a cold conference room overlooking downtown Los Angeles. Ryan arrived tense but overdressed, carrying confidence like armor he was trying desperately not to lose. The second he sat down, he leaned forward aggressively. We've lived in that house for years, he argued. There are laws about that. Adverse possession. Tenant protections. She can't just throw us out. Thomas Reed barely reacted, but Diane did. She lifted her eyes slowly from the documents in front of her, calm enough to make Ryan even more defensive. Adverse possession? She repeated softly. Ryan nodded quickly, seizing the moment. Exactly. We occupied the property openly. Diane almost smiled. Then she began speaking with the precise rhythm of someone who had spent decades correcting legal mistakes for a living. Adverse possession requires the legal owner to be absent from the property, she said. I live there continuously. It also requires unpaid taxes and unauthorized occupation. I paid every bill connected to that house myself. Ryan opened his mouth, closed it again. Diane continued before he could recover. And tenant protection requires a lease or legal tenancy. You had neither. The room shifted after that. Emily stared at her mother differently now. Not as a tired old woman clinging to peace, but as someone terrifyingly prepared. Because the truth finally became impossible to ignore. The quiet grandmother Ryan spent years dismissing had handled thousands of property disputes long before he ever walked into her house. Ryan tried to recover after that. He straightened in his chair, forcing confidence back into his posture, but Diane could already see the cracks spreading beneath it. Then she opened the second folder. I think Emily deserves the full picture, she said calmly. Ryan's head snapped toward her instantly. What are you doing? Diane ignored him and slid several printed statements across the table toward her daughter. Bank records, investment summaries, loan notices. Emily frowned as she picked them up. At first she read quickly, not fully understanding what she was seeing. Then her hands began to shake. Ryan, she whispered. One page showed repeated margin calls. Another revealed maxed-out credit lines, late payment notices, overdraft fees, account balances dangerously close to zero. Emily flipped to the final statement and stopped breathing for a second. There's no savings? Her voice cracked badly. You told me we had money set aside. Ryan leaned forward fast. It's temporary. The market dipped. I was restructuring things. Diane spoke quietly over him. He's been rolling debt into more debt for years. That's not true. Then show actual numbers, Thomas said evenly. Ryan froze. Just long enough for Emily to notice. That hesitation changed everything. Because suddenly all the confidence, all the speeches about future investments and big opportunities sounded hollow under fluorescent light and printed evidence. Emily stared down at the pages trembling in her hands while the truth tore through every excuse she had protected for years. The man she defended wasn't struggling. He was sinking. And he had been dragging everyone else down with him. The room felt smaller with every page Emily turned. Airless. Tight. She pressed one hand against her chest as if it might steady her breathing, but nothing inside her felt stable anymore. Ryan. Her voice barely came out. You said the investments were growing. They were supposed to, he answered quickly. Too quickly. Emily looked down again. Loan after loan. Interest piling onto interest. Cash advances. Hidden accounts she had never seen before. One document showed Diane covering overdue payments tied directly to Ryan's debts. Another revealed unpaid taxes Ryan had promised were already handled. Emily's face drained of color. You used my mother's money? She whispered. Ryan's jaw flexed hard. I was trying to fix things. For 4 years. Emily looked at him now like she no longer recognized the man sitting beside her. You kept saying we were close. You said we just needed patience. Ryan rubbed both hands over his face, suddenly unable to hold eye contact. Because the performance was collapsing in real time. Diane watched silently while her daughter's entire reality rearranged itself across a conference table. Every late night. Every excuse. Every moment Ryan made her feel guilty for questioning him. All of it had been built on pressure and illusion. Emily's breathing turned shallow. Oh my God, she whispered. We were never building a future, were we? Ryan said nothing. That silence answered her better than words ever could. For the first time since entering the room, Ryan looked small. Not powerful. Not confident. Just a frightened man sitting beneath the weight of his own lies while the woman beside him finally saw the truth. Nobody spoke for several long seconds after that. The fluorescent lights above the conference table buzzed softly, filling the silence Ryan could no longer control. He looked toward Emily first, then Thomas, finally Diane. His mouth opened once, searching for another explanation, another speech, another way to twist the room back in his favor. But every version of the story he had built over 4 years was lying exposed across the table in black ink. "I was trying to protect us," he muttered weakly. Diane studied him carefully. Not with anger anymore. That part had already burned away. "No," she said quietly. "You were protecting yourself." Ryan straightened suddenly, desperation flashing across his face. "You let us stay there." "Yes," Diane replied. "You paid the bills." "Yes. You never stopped us." Diane folded her hands calmly in front of her. "And that," she said, "was your mistake." Ryan frowned. For the first time since she had known him, he genuinely looked confused. Diane leaned forward slightly. "You confused my patience with permission." The sentence hit harder than the eviction notice, harder than the financial records, because it stripped away the one thing Ryan depended on most, the belief that Diane would always absorb the damage quietly. Now she wasn't. Ryan opened his mouth again. Nothing came out. Not anger. Not manipulation. Not even excuses. Just silence. Small. Humiliating. Final. And across the table, Emily watched the man who once dominated every room suddenly lose all authority without Diane raising her voice even once. Ryan unraveled faster after the meeting. The pressure that once stayed hidden behind arrogance now spilled into everything he touched. 2 nights later, sometime after midnight, Emily woke to the sharp glow of Ryan's laptop lighting the apartment living room. Empty beer bottles crowded the coffee table. His tie hung loose around his neck while he typed furiously with both hands. "What are you doing?" Emily asked carefully. Ryan didn't look up. "They're trying to destroy me," he muttered. "So I'm protecting myself." Then she saw the screen. An email chain. Not to friends. Not to a lawyer. To his company. Executives. Human resources. Senior management. Ryan had copied half the office into a rambling message accusing Diane, Thomas, and even Emily of psychological manipulation and financial sabotage. Paragraph after paragraph. Angry. Unstable. Impossible to follow. "Ryan, stop," Emily whispered. "Don't send that." But he already had. The notification chimed softly. Message sent. The room went still. 3 days later, another email arrived. Termination of employment. Ryan read it twice without speaking. No yelling this time. No speeches. Just a man staring at a screen while the control he spent years forcing onto everyone else collapsed in silence around him. The cruelest part? Nobody destroyed Ryan faster than Ryan himself. Emily lasted 6 more days after Ryan lost his job. 6 days of excuses. 6 days of pacing, blaming, slamming doors hard enough to rattle the apartment walls. Nothing was ever his fault. Not the debt. Not the lies. Not the eviction. Not the job. Everyone else had betrayed him. That was the word he kept using. Betrayed. The final break came in the parking lot outside their apartment complex just after sunset. Ryan followed Emily between rows of parked cars while she carried 2 small bags toward her trunk. "You're seriously leaving right now," he shouted. Emily kept walking. Ryan's voice rose louder. "So that's it? You're choosing your mother over your husband?" She stopped beside the car but didn't turn around immediately. For years that voice controlled her heartbeat. controlled her guilt, controlled her fear. Not anymore. You lied to me, she said quietly. Ryan threw his hands into the air. I was trying to build something for us. You were trying to survive off everyone around you. The words hit him like a slap. Ryan stepped closer, desperation breaking through the anger now. Emily, don't do this. Slowly, she looked down at her left hand. Then she removed her wedding ring. The metal caught the orange glow of the parking lot lights for one brief second before she placed it gently on the hood of his car. Ryan stared at it without moving. Emily opened her car door, and this time when she drove away she never looked back. Emily moved into a tiny studio apartment on the edge of the city 3 days later. One window, thin walls, a mattress on the floor. The refrigerator hummed louder than the television. It was the first place she had ever lived completely alone. Diane visited quietly that weekend carrying groceries and a small lamp from home. For a while, neither woman spoke much. Emily unpacked dishes slowly while Diane arranged food inside the refrigerator. Then Emily suddenly stopped moving. I almost went back, she admitted softly. Diane looked up. Emily wrapped both arms around herself, ashamed. The second the card stopped working, I panicked. Her eyes filled immediately. I kept thinking maybe I should apologize to him. Maybe I overreacted. Diane stayed silent long enough for her daughter to continue. If you had turned the internet back on, if you had paid for everything again, Emily's voice cracked badly now, I probably would have gone back to him. The truth hit both of them hard. Not because Emily was weak. Because survival can distort love until people confuse dependency with devotion. Diane walked over slowly and touched her daughter's shoulder. I know, she said gently. No lecture. No judgment. Just honesty sharp enough to hurt. And for the first time, Emily fully understood something terrifying. Her mother had not abandoned her. She had stopped rescuing the cage that kept her trapped. The first week alone felt awkward for Emily in ways she never expected. There was no shared account anymore. No automatic payments. No one else filling the refrigerator before she noticed it was empty. Everything small suddenly mattered. She stood frozen in a grocery aisle one afternoon comparing prices on canned soup for nearly 5 minutes before quietly putting 2 back on the shelf. Later that evening, she opened her first personal checking account that Ryan had never touched. The bank employee smiled politely while handing over the temporary debit card, but Emily stared at it longer than necessary. Such a simple thing. Yet it felt strangely huge. Control. Choice. Responsibility. For years, Ryan handled every financial decision, while convincing her she was being protected. Now Emily finally understood the difference between partnership and dependency. Some nights she still cried after turning off the lights. Not because she missed him, because she was grieving the version of life she thought she had. But little by little routine replaced fear. She learned how much groceries actually cost, how to budget, how peaceful silence could feel when nobody was controlling the emotional temperature of a room. And while Emily slowly learned how to live again, somewhere across the city, Ryan was spiraling deeper into isolation. Because the house was gone, the money was gone, Emily was gone, and very soon he was about to lose the last thing he still believed he could keep. The moving truck arrived just after sunrise. No drama, no police, no final explosion. Only the heavy sound of furniture being dragged across hardwood floors that Ryan once walked across like he owned them. Now every step echoed differently. Temporary. The movers worked quickly while Ryan stood near the front door wearing the same wrinkled jacket from 3 days earlier. He looked exhausted. Smaller somehow. Like life had finally stopped rearranging itself around his anger. A neighbor watering flowers across the street glanced over once, then looked away. Nobody came outside to help him. Nobody asked if he was okay. Inside the house, the silence felt clean for the first time in years. Ryan carried the final box down the porch steps himself. His breathing was rough by the time he reached the truck. One of the movers shut the back door with a metallic slam that rang through the quiet morning air. That was it. Everything gone. Ryan stood there for another few seconds without moving. Then slowly, almost instinctively, he turned back toward the house. Waiting. For Emily to appear. For Diane to stop him. For someone to say this had gone too far. But the front door stayed closed. No voice called his name. No footsteps followed him. And in the cruelest moment of all, Ryan finally understood something no one had needed to say aloud. The house was done grieving him long before he left it. Diane returned to the house that afternoon carrying nothing but her purse, her keys, and a small paint sample tucked beneath her arm. The moment she stepped inside, the silence greeted her differently this time. Not tense. Not cautious. Free. She stood in the middle of the living room for several seconds, letting herself feel it fully. The air no longer carried Ryan's anger. No television blasting. No doors slamming somewhere down the hallway. Just stillness warmed by late afternoon sunlight. Then Diane walked to the windows one by one and opened every curtain in the house. Fresh California air rushed inside immediately. Light poured across the empty floorboards. Across the walls. Across the spaces that had once felt too small for her to exist inside comfortably. She rolled up her sleeves after that. Not because the house was dirty. Because reclaiming something sometimes requires touching it with your own hands. Diane wiped down shelves slowly. Reorganized furniture. Threw away broken items Ryan had left behind without even noticing. By evening, she opened the small can of peach-colored paint and pressed the roller carefully against the living room wall. Soft color spread across years of heaviness. The final sunlight of the day stretched through the open windows, covering the nearly empty room in warm gold while Diane stood there breathing steadily. Not victorious. Not bitter. Just finally home again. That evening, after the paint had dried and the house finally smelled like fresh air instead of tension, Diane walked slowly toward the corner beside the window. Her chair was there again. The old brown chair Ryan used to complain about because it made the room look outdated. She rested her hand against the worn fabric for a moment before lowering herself into it carefully. The cushions sank beneath her weight exactly the way they always had. Familiar. Steady. For the first time in years, Diane did not brace herself after sitting down. No footsteps coming down the hallway. No irritated sighs. No fear that someone would suddenly demand the room back from her. Outside, the California sky faded into soft gold while warm evening light stretched across the newly painted peach walls. Diane reached for the remote resting quietly on the side table. The same remote. The same living room. But everything felt different now. She pressed the button. The television flickered on softly, filling the room with ordinary sound again. A news anchor speaking. Music from a commercial. Small noises that once belonged to her life before she learned to survive inside silence. Diane leaned back slowly and let the sound wash through the house. Not loud. Not hidden. Just normal. Her eyes moved briefly toward the empty couch Ryan used to dominate every night. Then away from it. Because the room no longer carried his presence. Only hers. A small smile touched Diane's face as she adjusted the volume one level higher than before. And in that tiny movement, years of humiliation finally released their grip. Not through revenge. Not through screaming. But through something Ryan never understood how to value. Peace. A week later, Emily stood quietly outside the front door holding a small paper bag of pastries from a bakery Diane used to love. The afternoon breeze moved softly through the trees while she stared at the house for several long seconds before finally knocking. Not walking in. Not using a key. Knocking. Diane opened the door almost immediately. Neither woman spoke at first. They simply looked at each other in the warm light spilling through the entryway. "You don't have to stand out there," Diane said gently. Emily gave a small, embarrassed smile. "I know." She lowered her eyes briefly. It just felt wrong to walk in like before. That mattered more to Diane than any apology could have. Emily stepped inside slowly, careful now in ways she had never been before. The house felt lighter, quieter. No tension waiting inside the walls. They sat together in the living room while tea warmed between their hands. No dramatic speeches followed. Healing arrived differently, in pauses that no longer hurt, in conversations that didn't require fear, in the simple sound of two women existing peacefully in the same room again. Before leaving that evening, Emily paused near the front door. "Thank you for letting me come over," she said softly. Diane smiled. "Anytime, sweetheart." And for the first time in years, the word home no longer sounded complicated between them. A month later, the living room looked completely different again. Fresh flowers sat near the window. Soft jazz played quietly in the background. The peach-colored walls carried warmth now instead of tension. Every Thursday afternoon, a small group of older women gathered there around Diane's dining table with teacups, notebooks, and folders spread between trays of cookies. First, it started accidentally. One neighbor asked Diane how she handled the eviction legally. Then another woman admitted her son had been pressuring her to transfer property ownership. By the third week, the meetings became regular. "No one teaches women our age how to protect ourselves," one widow confessed quietly. Diane nodded. "Then we start teaching each other." She showed them how to read ownership documents, how to avoid fraudulent transfers, how to protect retirement accounts. Some women took notes with shaking hands. Others simply listened with tears in their eyes. Because underneath every legal question sat the same fear. Being erased slowly inside your own life. One afternoon, Emily stood in the kitchen doorway watching her mother explain property rights to a nervous elderly woman who kept apologizing for asking stupid questions. Diane smiled gently. There are no stupid questions when someone is trying to keep their dignity. And in that moment, Emily realized something beautiful. The pain Ryan caused had not hardened her mother. It had transformed her into shelter for other women still trapped in silence. Late that night, after the last guest had gone home and the house settled into peaceful quiet once again, Diane remained alone in the living room beside the open window. Crickets hummed softly outside. Somewhere down the street, a car passed beneath the glow of California streetlights. The television played low in the background while warm lamplight rested across the peach-colored walls. Diane leaned back into her old chair slowly, comfortably, naturally, like someone no longer asking permission to exist. Her eyes drifted toward the remote resting beside her hand. For a moment, she simply looked at it. A small object, yet somehow tied to the exact moment her life changed. Then Diane picked it up gently and raised the volume one single level higher. Not loud, just enough. A quiet choice made without fear. As ordinary sound filled the room, her voice carried softly in reflection. "Boundaries do not destroy families," Diane said. "They only reveal who truly saw you as family to begin with." The house remained still around her. Not empty, healed. And in that calm silence, something deeper than revenge finally settled into place. Silence, relief, dignity, peace that no longer needed to fight to survive.